Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a very long walk together, not through forests, not through sleepy neighborhoods, but through the endless stones and arches of Rome's aqueducts. Imagine the night air of ancient Italy wrapping around you, cool and faintly dusty, while 1,000 little lamps flicker in doorways along the streets. You can almost hear the distant splash of water pouring into a fountain, though no river runs close by. That's the magic of this story, a city that drinks far more water than nature intended, kept alive by channels that stretch for miles like stone veins. You're going to trace them, step by step, until the gentle rhythm of history lulls you deeper than any lullaby. And yes, you probably won't survive this walk in real life 15 miles under the Mediterranean sun, past quarries, hills, and scaffolding. But here, in the safe glow of your bedroom, it's the perfect bedtime journey. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're awake enough, drop a quick comment with your location and what time it is where you are. I always love seeing our little sleepy map of the world come together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice is Rome itself, a city sprawled across 7 hills, bustling with noise, dust, and the occasional goat trying to eat a senator's toga fringe. It's beautiful in its way, but the rivers are inconvenient. The Tiber runs brown and swampy, unpredictable in floods, and not nearly enough to keep 1,000,000 thirsty Romans happy. Wells? Too shallow? Rainwater? Good luck relying on the sky. This is where the aqueducts come in, long, improbable constructions that drag water across landscapes, over valleys, and sometimes right into the private courtyards of the elite. You step onto a cobbled road where surveyors once stood, squinting toward distant hills. They knew their city was greedy for water. Public baths alone demanded more gallons each day than you could carry in a lifetime. A single thermi complex might require an entire aqueduct just to keep the pools steaming and the fountains burbling. Historians still argue whether this obsession with baths was pure hygiene, social theater, or just a clever excuse to avoid working afternoons. Probably a mix of all three. As you wander deeper into the night, you notice a faint line stretching over the landscape, the ghost of an aqueduct's beginning. It doesn't roar like a river or sparkle like a lake. Instead, it trickles silently from a spring tucked in the Apennines, sometimes dozens of miles away. The Romans were picky about water. Not any puddle would do. Springs were sacred. Literally, many had shrines to nymphs or gods nearby. A good aqueduct started with divine approval, or at least a bribe to the local priest. You shuffle forward, tracing the imagined footsteps of engineers. They walked these hillsides with a strange combination of science and superstition. A clear, cold spring meant fresh water. A muddy one got a shrug and a sacrifice of a goat. And here's the quirky tidbit. Romans actually believed that certain waters made you healthier, stronger, even more fertile. Whether that's placebo or mineral content is still debated, but hey, it was a free health plan. The night stretches on as you descend toward a valley, and the problem becomes obvious. Water doesn't like to flow uphill. It insists on its own quiet, stubborn rules, the Roman solution. Build higher, cut deeper, or bend the route so gently that gravity does the work. Imagine the patience that required every 100 feet. The surveyors checked the level with a wooden frame called a chorobates, basically a giant carpenter's tool with water inside to keep it straight. Miss by even a hair, and your aqueduct either dried up or flooded the countryside. You walk on, feeling the rhythm of their work. Every drop of water in Rome once began with these careful decisions under open skies. You can almost hear the engineers arguing, scribbling in wax tablets, or cursing when a mule tripped over the measuring rods. And you, following their ghostly path, realize how absurdly human it all feels. Rome wasn't just marble and emperors. It was sweaty workers, stubborn springs, and a city desperate for long, cool drinks. Somewhere out in the dark, a fountain splashes again, as if to remind you why they bothered. You keep wandering, tracing those faint survey lines away from the city, and soon you find yourself climbing into the hills where the air grows sharper, tinged with the resin of pines and the trickle of unseen springs. Here is where the Romans began their great hunts, not for gold, not for treasure, but for the cleanest, coldest water they could find. Springs were life, and they were picky about them. A good aqueduct didn't just grab whatever puddle or marsh was nearby. No, it had to begin in the mountains, where snowmelt seeped down through stone and emerged crisp enough to impress even the fussiest senator's palate. You picture the surveyors, sunburned and probably grumpy, tramping along ridges with their measuring rods. They weren't just engineers, they were part priest, part gambler, part stubborn mule. Why priest? Because before digging a single trench, you had to make offerings to the gods of water. Springs were considered sacred. Nymphs were said to guard them. You couldn't just stomp up with a bucket and some bricks. A little incense, a few prayers, and perhaps a goat that had very bad luck that day were part of the routine. If the water came out tasting fresh and sweet, it was a sign of divine approval. Historians still argue whether these rituals were genuine belief or just an early form of community relations, a polite way of convincing villagers not to chase surveyors off their land. After all, imagine someone showing up in your backyard, poking at the ground, and announcing they were about to dig a 50-mile ditch across your farm. You'd want a little ceremony too. As you shuffle along, you notice the Romans favored high ground. They preferred sources that would naturally slope toward the city, minimizing the need for complex devices. No pumps, no magic, just gravity and patience. This is where the first bit of Roman genius shows. They accepted nature's rules instead of fighting them. A Roman aqueduct never climbed higher than its source. Simple in theory, maddening in practice. You picture the engineers hunched over wax tablets, sketching lines and arguing about angles. One of them insists on the shortest route. Another insists on avoiding that stubborn hill shaped like a giant loaf of bread. And all the while, you trail behind, hearing the mutters and the occasional ooh when a survey rod tips in the wind. It's not glamorous, but it is strangely soothing, like watching someone play an eternal game of connect the dots across the countryside. The quirky part? Romans sometimes followed animal trails. Deer and goats instinctively seek the easiest paths across rugged land, and surveyors weren't above stealing their homework. If a goat could find a steady slope, why not use it? You trudge behind a few ghostly hoofprints now, realizing the city's fountains may have owed their gurgle to a particularly thirsty goat. Of course, there were failures. Some aqueducts were planned, begun, even partially built, only to be abandoned when the math didn't work or the spring dried up. One ancient author snarked that a surveyor built more ditches than he filled with water. Imagine spending years carving stone channels only to find out your source was seasonal. That's the kind of mistake that keeps you awake at night, or at least makes for a very awkward performance review. The wind shifts and you feel the cool dampness of a spring nearby. In your mind's eye, you see the Romans encasing it in stone, building a little protective house around the bubbling water so no wandering cow could pollute it. They called this the caput aquae, the head of the water. From here, the liquid would begin its long, gravity-driven march toward Rome. It feels ceremonial, like the christening of a ship, except instead of champagne you just have cold mountain runoff splashing into a carved basin. And yet, for all their precision, you can sense the anxiety in these surveyors. A slope too steep, and the water roars uncontrollably, tearing apart channels. Too shallow, and it stagnates, growing slimy with algae. The sweet spot? A drop of just a few inches every 100 feet. Try explaining that to a team of workers with shovels and questionable motivation. You sit on a boulder, looking out at the endless ridges between here and Rome. To you, it seems impossible, like trying to carry a teacup full of water across a football field without spilling a drop. But for the Romans, this was simply the start. Find the spring, honor the gods, calculate the slope, and then dig, cut, build, repeat, mile after mile. The city may be far away, but in this quiet mountain place, the lifeline has been chosen. The walk has truly begun. Your footsteps crunch along a gravelly ridge as the route stretches out before you. The Romans, ever stubborn, have drawn a straight line on their wax tablets, an almost arrogant gesture against the messy folds of the Italian landscape. You try to follow it, but almost immediately the ground rebels. A hill swells up in your path, not high enough to look heroic, but just tall enough to ruin a surveyor's dream of a perfect line. This is where the endless debate begins. Do you cut through it, tunnel under it, or bend the course around like a river too lazy to fight? It's not a quick decision. Romans loved straight lines. They believed geometry itself was a kind of moral virtue. Crooked things hinted at weakness, laziness, or even bad character. And yet water doesn't care about virtue. It wants the easiest route, not the prettiest. So you picture a group of engineers standing on the slope, waving arms, pointing at rocks, arguing until someone finally slams a stick into the ground and declares, "We'll tunnel." Cue groans from the workers, who know that means months in the dark with chisels and questionable lung capacity. Historians still argue whether Roman surveying was always as precise as legend suggests. Sure, some aqueducts hit the perfect balance, snaking across hills with impossible grace. Others, not so much. Archaeologists have found abandoned channels, awkward detours, and tunnels that clearly missed their intended meeting point, forcing frantic fixes. You can almost feel the exasperation of some poor overseer realizing that two teams digging from opposite ends of a hill didn't actually meet in the middle. Imagine explaining that to your boss. Well, technically we did meet, just several feet apart, and also one tunnel is lower than the other. You shuffle along the imagined line of one of those tunnels, peering into a shadowy cut in the hillside. The entrance smells of damp stone and old sweat. Workers with pickaxes once hacked away here, guided only by oil lamps and the faint hope they wouldn't suffocate before daylight. The air feels thin, even in memory. Some aqueduct tunnels stretched for miles, and to keep them bearable, ventilation shafts were sunk from above, little chimneys dotting the hillsides like a row of forgotten wells. From a distance, you'd see these neat punctures marking the aqueduct's secret path underground, like breadcrumbs scattered by an obsessive architect. But sometimes tunneling wasn't worth the misery. You wander a bit farther and see another solution: detours. The Romans could bend their lines, even if reluctantly. Aqueducts often zigzagged around obstacles, adding miles just to avoid one stubborn ridge. To modern eyes, it looks inefficient. To the Romans, it was just good sense, because if a crooked mile was easier than a straight one, why not? The goal wasn't perfection. The goal was water in the city, no matter how winding the path. And then there was the boldest option, slicing right through the obstacle. Some hills were literally carved open, trenches cut so deep they looked like scars across the land. You tread carefully along one now, picturing the avalanche of stone chips, the donkeys hauling baskets, the constant hammer of iron on limestone. Progress was slow, measured not in yards per day, but in handfuls of feet. And yet, mile after mile, they kept at it, stubborn as gravity itself. Here's a quirky tidbit. The Romans sometimes disguised their detours as religious necessity. If a survey line bent awkwardly, someone might claim it was to avoid disturbing a sacred grove or an unlucky burial site. That way, no one had to admit that the math had been off. You smirk at the thought-blaming geometry mistakes on ghosts was probably the ancient version of "the dog ate my homework." As you keep trudging, the landscape opens into a valley. Here, the straight line returns with a vengeance, stretching across emptiness where the aqueduct will eventually soar on arches. But that is later. For now, you're still in the messy business of compromise engineers grumbling, hills resisting, and water waiting patiently at its spring. The night air is still, as though holding its breath for the next decision. Do you tunnel, cut, or detour? Each path is hard. Each path is absurd. And yet, little by little, they chose, and Rome kept drinking. You leave the ridge behind and drift down into a clearing where the noise isn't of wind or water, but of men muttering, tools clinking, and the occasional donkey braying in protest. This is where the aqueduct stops being a dream line on a wax tablet and turns into a very slow, very sweaty construction site. And like every construction site in history, it begins with tools some ingenious, some so simple they make you wonder how anything got built at all. The first thing you spot is a group of surveyors balancing a strange wooden contraption. It looks like a carpenter's bench crossed with a child's seesaw. This is the chorobates, essentially a giant spirit level, except instead of a bubble in a tube, it uses water in a trough. You imagine the surveyors pouring carefully from clay jars, squinting at ripples, waiting for the liquid to settle. One wrong move, one drunk donkey nudging the frame, and the line's ruined. You can almost hear the sighs when someone has to repeat the measurement for the 5th time. Nearby, another group fiddles with a groma. At first glance, it's nothing fancy, just a vertical pole with cross arms dangling weighted strings. But with those simple plumb lines, Roman engineers could lay out right angles and straight paths. It's not flashy, but without it, every aqueduct would have wobbled like a drunk senator on festival night. You shuffle closer and see the strings swaying gently in the breeze. Engineers barking at assistants to hold still, stop sneezing, the gods aren't helping you if the line's crooked. Historians still argue whether these instruments were as precise as we imagine. Could a wooden chorobates really keep a slope steady over dozens of miles? Or was Roman success more about sheer persistence, measuring, correcting, measuring again until the water finally flowed where it should? Some scholars say the myth of Roman precision is exaggerated, that luck and endless labor mattered as much as math. And honestly, watching one poor guy trip over a survey rod, you're inclined to believe them. Of course, tools weren't just for measuring. Workers had their own arsenal: iron picks, wooden shovels, chisels that rang against stone until sparks flew in the dusk. Each spadeful of dirt landed with a thud. Each chisel mark left a scar. Progress was glacial but steady. Rome wasn't built in a day, and its aqueducts weren't either. They were the slow, methodical accumulation of blisters, curses, and broken handles. You pause at a quirky sight, an overseer scribbling furiously on a wax tablet, recording measurements, costs, maybe even notes about which worker took too many breaks. Wax tablets were the iPads of their time, except you erased them by smoothing with a stylus rather than swiping. You picture some poor intern tasked with carrying a dozen of these, praying he doesn't drop them in a puddle before the end of the shift. The scene stretches out around you, mules hauling baskets of stone, masons sharpening tools on whetstones, and surveyors endlessly fussing with their devices. Somewhere in the background, a cook stirs a pot of lentil stew, because even the most ambitious infrastructure project still comes down to men needing dinner. And of course, the occasional joke ripples through the crew, like the one about how a crooked groma line meant the gods were tipsy again. But underneath the noise, there's rhythm. A pickaxe strikes, a string plumb bob sways, a wax tablet scratches. It's monotonous, hypnotic, the kind of background hum that makes your eyelids heavy. You realize that's the secret. Rome's marvels weren't born from genius alone, but from repetition, hundreds of tiny, boring tasks done carefully enough to last 2,000 years. You trail a hand along the wooden frame of the chorobates, still damp from its water trough. A little breeze ruffles the strings of the groma. Somewhere, a mule stamps its hoof. The tools of empire aren't glorious. They're practical, a little clumsy, but they work. And in their awkward way, they're building the veins that will keep Rome alive. You shuffle onward, leaving behind the measuring contraptions and stepping into the raw, earthy world of trenches. It doesn't look elegant, at least not yet. The hillside has been scarred open, strips of soil peeled back, revealing clay and gravel in layers like a cake no one actually wants to eat. Workers are everywhere, bare arms glistening with sweat, tunics streaked with dust, voices hoarse from shouting over the clatter of iron on stone. This is the part of aqueduct building that doesn't make it onto the postcards, the endless digging. You wander beside one of the trenches, narrow and deep, watching a line of men haul soil in wicker baskets. Each step feels repetitive, almost meditative, like the beat of a drum. One man shovels, another lifts, another dumps the load onto a growing mound. Over and over, hour after hour, until the trench stretches like a scar across the countryside. The slope must be perfect. Remember that sweet spot of just a few inches drop for every 100 feet. That means constant adjustments. Too shallow and the water stagnates, a green soup of algae. Too steep and it rushes so fast it erodes the stone lining. Historians still argue whether the Roman overseers could really keep that slope so steady without modern instruments. But when you look down into the trench, the channel seems to flow as if it's already alive. as if gravity itself has been trained like a dog to heel at the engineer's whistle. There's a strange comfort in the monotony. You watch the rhythm of picks hitting soil, hear the scrape of shovels, and it becomes almost like a lullaby. You can imagine falling asleep right there, curled on a pile of loose dirt, rocked by the sound of history being dug inch by inch. Of course, the workers wouldn't approve. They're exhausted enough without tripping over a sleepy bystander. One quirky detail catches your eye: little leather shoes left neatly on a rock, their owner working barefoot in the trench. Why? Some Romans believed it gave them better grip, less slipping on damp clay. Others probably just didn't want to ruin their only pair of sandals. Either way, the sight of dirty feet pounding the soil gives the work a strangely timeless quality. You could picture the same thing happening on any modern construction site, just with steel-toed boots instead of calloused toes. The soil itself tells stories. Red clay, gritty sand, chalky stone, each layer dug through like reading a book backward in the dark. Occasionally a shout goes up when the diggers hit something unexpected, a buried pot, an old coin, maybe even a forgotten grave. When that happens, the overseer has to make a decision, reroute, record, or pretend it never happened. And sometimes, let's be honest, pretending it never happened was the quickest option. Donkey snorts nearby, shaking its head as another basket is strapped to its back. The animals are the uncredited heroes of this process hauling rubble, dragging supplies, occasionally refusing to budge until bribed with figs. You follow one as it plods along the trench edge, its hooves clopping in slow rhythm, and you realize the sound is almost musical. Pick, shovel, hoofbeat, sigh, it's like the background percussion of Roman infrastructure. Quarry stones arrive now and then, delivered to reinforce the trench walls. Workers chip them into shape, wedge them together, and smear them with lime mortar. Slowly, the raw gash in the earth begins to look less like a wound and more like a channel. It's still ugly, but it's purposeful. You pause to watch a mason run his hand along the stone, nodding with satisfaction. For him, the trench isn't just a ditch, it's the skeleton of a future waterway. The sun sets in your imagination, painting the piles of dirt in fading gold. The workers keep going a little longer, because time is precious and the city is thirsty. Torches are lit, their smoke curling upward, and shadows stretch across the unfinished trench. You follow the flickering light, listening to the steady scrape and thud. It's not glamorous, but it's the heartbeat of Rome's survival. And in that repetition, in those trenches that seem to go on forever, you finally understand the aqueduct wasn't built by genius alone, but by thousands of hands patiently carving the land, one spadeful at a time. The trench fades into sturdier forms now. As you walk farther, the muddy paths give way to a half-built channel lined with cut stones, bricks stacked in careful rows, and a smell in the air that's oddly familiar, something like wet sand after rain, but sharper, dustier. You realize it's the scent of lime and volcanic ash. Here you've stumbled upon the Romans' real magic ingredient: concrete. You stop beside a group of masons who are mixing it in wide, shallow troughs. The recipe looks simple: lime, water, sand, and a dash of volcanic dust called pozzolana. Stir it together, and like some enchanted potion, the slurry hardens into a stone stronger than almost anything you can name. Stronger, in fact, than most of our modern concrete, which often cracks within decades. The quirky tidbit here? Roman concrete sometimes gets stronger with age. Scientists studying it today have found crystals forming inside the material over centuries, healing tiny cracks. So, yes, the secret to eternal empire might have been volcanic dust. You crouch down and touch a half-set block. Its warm concrete actually heats as it cures. Workers smooth the top with wooden paddles, muttering complaints as the mixture splashes their legs. Imagine spending your day ankle-deep in sticky paste, only to go home looking like you lost a fight with a swamp. And yet, this mess was the glue of Rome's ambition. Without it, aqueducts would have crumbled into rubble before the first bathhouse filled. Historians still argue whether the Romans truly understood the chemistry behind their miracle mix, or if they just noticed, hey, this volcanic stuff works better than sand, let's use more of that. Either way, you can thank Italy's volcanic landscape, particularly around Naples, for producing the right kind of ash. The land that destroyed Pompeii also provided the cement for Rome's greatness. Talk about irony. You trail along the growing walls of the channel. Each block is laid with maddening care. Tap it with a hammer, shift it by an inch, smear on another layer of mortar, repeat. From a distance, it looks uniform. Up close, you see fingerprints pressed into the wet surface, graffiti scratched by board workers, even the paw print of a dog who wandered across too soon. 2,000 years later, archaeologists still find those prints, tiny immortal accidents in the empire's grand design. As the walls rise, the trench transforms into something purposeful. Water won't touch it yet, but you can already imagine it flowing, a steady silver ribbon sliding past stone and brick. You lean over the edge, hearing phantom echoes of splashes and trickles, as though the aqueduct is rehearsing its role before the curtain rises. A group of bricklayers nearby chant to keep rhythm, slap the mortar, place the brick, tap, tap, tap. It's strangely soothing, like a work song to lull not just workers but also time itself. The night air is cooler now, the torches casting orange halos across wet walls. Somewhere in the distance, an overseer barks orders, probably reminding everyone that Rome wants its baths steaming yesterday. You notice the mix of materials: stone for the foundation, brick for smoother lines, concrete binding it all together. It's not uniform because it doesn't have to be. Romans were practical. They used whatever was cheap and nearby. In Gaul, more stone. In Africa, more brick. Always the same principle: a solid shell lined with waterproof mortar to keep leaks at bay. One quirky sight makes you smile: a boy carrying water in a clay jar to keep the mortar damp, sloshing half of it onto his tunic by accident. Even the water used to build the aqueduct has to be fetched the old-fashioned way, ironic, since the very structure will one day end that endless fetching. And there's something oddly tender in the way masons smooth each surface. They know water is merciless, it will find every crack, every weakness. So each stroke of the paddle is both art and defense. You run your hand along one finished wall, the surface surprisingly silky for stone, and you can almost believe it will last forever. By torchlight, the masons keep working, sweat mingling with mortar, chants echoing off half-built walls. The trench is gone. In its place, a channel has been born: stone, brick, and that strange Roman magic dust. You step away, and in your imagination, you already hear the water rushing, patient as time itself, toward a thirsty city. You wander on, and suddenly the land opens into a wide valley. The trench and stone channels you've been following come to an abrupt halt at the edge of a cliff, as though the builders shrugged and said, "Well, this is awkward." Far below lies a patchwork of fields and grazing sheep. To keep the aqueduct flowing, they need to cross this chasm. The solution rises before you: arches, stone skeletons stacked so high your neck starts to ache just from looking. The Romans didn't invent arches, but they perfected them. Each one is a puzzle of wedge-shaped stones called voussoirs, locked together with a keystone at the top. The more weight they carry, the tighter they grip. It's one of those counterintuitive tricks of engineering. The heavier the load, the stronger the arch becomes. You step close enough to run your hand along a half-finished curve, the stones rough, the mortar still fresh. Above you, scaffolding of wood and rope groans under the pressure of men scrambling to place each block. Historians still argue whether some of the tallest arcades were feats of reckless bravado or cautious math. The Aqua Claudia, for instance, soared nearly 30 meters high in places. That's about 10 stories without steel, without cranes, just pulleys, ropes, and nerves of iron. Some say it was sheer necessity, others whisper it was political theater, emperors showing off their ability to outdo nature itself. You imagine the workers balancing on wobbly planks high above the ground, shouting instructions no one can hear over the wind. A single mistake could send a block tumbling, or worse, send the worker tumbling with it. And yet the line keeps climbing, stone by stone, arch by arch, until it spans the valley like a frozen wave. There's a quirky tidbit about these arches. Sometimes, when construction dragged on too long, shepherds and farmers below would graze animals in the shade of the half-finished arcade, treating it as just another piece of landscape furniture. Imagine pausing mid-graze while a block the size of your cow swings overhead on a creaky rope. Not exactly OSHA approved. You crane your neck again, feeling the sheer height press against your chest. The arches rise like ladders into the sky, each one echoing the curve of the last, repeating into the distance until the line looks infinite. From up here, the channel will flow smoothly, gravity pulling it gently along, unbothered by the valley below. You realize this isn't just engineering, it's defiance. The aqueduct isn't adapting to the land anymore, it's dominating it. And the soundscape changes. Gone is the muffled thud of picks in earth. Here, you hear the crack of hammers on stone, the creak of scaffolding, the grunt of men hauling ropes. Every noise echoes into the open valley, magnified by the height. You lean against a support pier, feeling the vibration of each strike ripple through the stone. As night falls, torches are raised on the scaffolds, tiny flames flickering against the dark sky. The arches glow like ribs of some colossal creature, half buried in shadow. Workers keep climbing, their silhouettes black against the stars. The whole structure seems impossibly fragile, like a house of cards made of rock. And yet, centuries later, some of these very arches will still be standing, shrugging off time, weather, even earthquakes. You take a step back, almost dizzy from the scale. This is the part of aqueduct construction people remember: the grand, the dramatic, the part that makes tourists gasp. But standing here, neck craned, eyelids heavy, you realize the grandeur is built on monotony. Stones stacked, mortar smeared, scaffolding creaking, endlessly repeated. And somehow, out of that repetition, Rome found a way to soar across valleys. Above you, another stone slides into place with a dull, perfect thud. The arch locks. The line continues. And you keep walking, still marveling at how high ambition can climb on the backs of ordinary men. The arches fade behind you as the path dips downward into shadow. Here the aqueduct doesn't rise proudly against the sky it hides, burrowing into hillsides and threading through rock. You step into the darkness of a tunnel, the air instantly cooler, damp against your skin, smelling of limestone and smoke from old torches. The sound changes too. No hammer clangs, no creaking scaffolds. Just the muffled scrape of picks and the low thud of chisels echoing from far inside. This is the miner's world, where daylight vanishes and courage is measured by how deep you're willing to crawl. Romans cut tunnels by hand, inch by stubborn inch, men crouched with iron chisels, swinging at stone until sparks flared in the gloom. You shuffle forward and hear the faint cough of a worker, the wheeze of lungs straining in stale air. Ventilation shafts puncture the ceiling here and there. Thin beams of moonlight slanting down like celestial ladders, but they're few and far between. The method was slow. Two teams often dug from opposite sides of a hill, hoping their tunnels would meet in the middle. Sometimes they did, perfectly aligned, like magic. Other times, not so much. Historians still argue how often those misses happened. Archaeologists have found places where the teams met but at different heights, forcing awkward stair-step fixes in the channel. Imagine the collective groan echoing through the dark when they realized gravity wasn't going to cooperate. You trail a hand along the rough wall, cool and wet. Occasionally, your fingers catch a carved mark, tally scratches left by miners counting progress, or maybe just doodles to pass the time. One quirky discovery archaeologists made in such tunnels was a crude sketch of a donkey proof that even underground, someone found time to be bored enough to draw. The tunnel stretches on, and the flicker of torchlight reveals a crew of workers hunched in the dust. Their tools are primitive: picks, hammers, wooden wedges they hammer into cracks, sometimes even fire. Yes, fire. One technique was to light a blaze against the rock face. Let the heat fracture the stone, then douse it with water so the sudden chill cracked it further. The smell must have been awful burnt smoke mixing with wet minerals, but it worked. You can almost hear the hiss and pop, see sparks bouncing off the dark walls. And then there's the silence between strikes. Long, heavy silences where men paused to catch breath, to pray the air didn't turn foul. Candles were often used as a test. If the flame guttered or died, it was a warning to flee before suffocation crept in. You picture one flickering weakly in a miner's hand now, its glow trembling as if nervous. The shafts above are a small comfort. Climbing them was possible, though not pleasant. Imagine scaling a narrow stone chimney slick with damp moss, lugging up a basket of rubble just to dump it topside. From the surface, these shafts looked like scattered wells. Villagers sometimes peered down, tossing stones for mischief, probably earning curses from the choking miners below. You take a few more steps, the darkness pressing closer, and realize how disorienting this would be. Days blurred. Sunlight was a rumor. The rhythm of work was the only clock. Scrape, chip, hammer, haul, over and over. The monotony is almost soothing now, lulling you deeper into that half-dream state, where the tunnel becomes endless and the sound of picks could be your own heartbeat. And yet, despite the claustrophobia, you sense pride in these workers. Arches may have been dramatic, but tunnels were quiet victories. Without them, the aqueduct's line would have broken on every stubborn hill. With them, Rome's water could snake invisibly through mountains, out of sight but never out of service. You pause at a bend where the tunnel suddenly widens. Perhaps two teams finally met here, their shouts echoing with relief in the dark. The floor slopes gently, just right for gravity to carry water forward. It feels alive, even though no water flows yet, as if the mountain itself is exhaling, making space for a river in its lungs. You keep walking, candlelight fading, footsteps soft in the dust. Behind you, the arches still glow against the stars. Ahead, the tunnel swallows you whole, and Rome's lifeline stretches on, silent and stubborn, through the bones of the earth. The tunnel breath you left behind finally gives way to open air again. You emerge blinking, half relieved, half dazed, into a valley where the aqueduct must cross, not with arches or bridges, but with a trick of the earth itself. Ahead lies Aspicus, the channel vanishing underground once more. Only this time it dips into a valley floor and then improbably climbs back up the other side. You squint, trying to figure it out. How can water possibly flow uphill? Here is where the Romans outwitted nature with an invention that feels like sorcery, inverted siphons. Instead of stone arches marching across, they laid pipe, sleed, clay, sometimes even carved stone blocks down into the valley and back up. Gravity, being a stubborn friend, drags water downward, building pressure at the bottom. That pressure then pushes it up the opposite slope. To your sleepy mind, it feels like a cosmic straw, the earth itself slurping. You trail along the ridge and spot a team wrestling with pipes. Lead pipes glint dully in the sun, coiled and unyielding. Clay ones are lighter but fragile, prone to cracking if a careless mule cart bumps them. Workers smear sticky pitch to seal joints, the smell strong enough to curl your nose. It's sticky business, and you can almost hear one laborer grumbling about how this was not in the job description. There's a scholarly debate here. Some argue inverted siphons were rare and expensive. Others think they were surprisingly common in tricky terrain. The truth may lie somewhere in between. Historians still argue whether Rome preferred to show off with massive arches instead, keeping siphons as a backup. But when they were used, they worked with jaw-dropping efficiency. Pressure at the bottom of a deep valley could be immense, so much so that even a tiny crack in a pipe turned into a fountain spraying everywhere. Quirky detail. Archaeologists once found a siphon pipe reused centuries later as a makeshift coffin. Imagine being buried inside what once carried water to a city bathhouse. Functional recycling, Roman style. As you shuffle along the slope, you notice men hauling rubble to build castella, stone collection tanks that help manage the pressure. These tanks were like pit stops for the water pausing, redistributing, then surging forward again. You hear the thunk of hammers, the grind of rope pulleys lifting stone caps into place. The work is noisy, chaotic, almost theatrical compared to the hushed gloom of tunnels. Looking down, the valley floor seems littered with discarded shards of clay pipe. Workers curse, toss broken sections aside, and grab fresh ones. You imagine the frustration of installing mile after mile, only to have one weak link split open and undo the whole system. It's a bit like stringing up holiday lights. If one bulb fails, the whole line mocks you. Still, there's an elegance to it. The siphon is invisible once finished, buried beneath soil and forgotten by travelers who walk across, unaware that a hidden river surges beneath their feet. You pause at the bottom where several men are testing a pipe. They pour in water from a bucket. At first it dribbles out miserably, pooling in the dust. Then, with a faint whoosh, it surges, climbing impossibly upward until it splashes into the next reservoir. The workers cheer. You blink slowly, lulled by the rhythm, thinking it's almost like watching a magician pull off a trick you can't quite explain. Night edges closer, and the valley glows in twilight. Torches flicker, shadows stretch long, and the pipes lie half-buried like the ribs of some giant creature. You find yourself imagining water coursing here, invisible but unstoppable, a river moving to Rome's command. The air cools as you climb the far side, pipelines trailing beside you, vanishing into soil. Above, the stars return, scattered across the sky, echoing the faint glimmers of torchlight below. The aqueduct stretches on, unfazed by valleys or mountains, reminding you that even the land itself was negotiable to Roman engineers. Your steps slow. The day's work has been endless arches, suffocating tunnels, and now siphons tricking gravity. Each obstacle met, conquered, carried forward. The steady hum of progress lulls you again, almost hypnotic, like water trickling endlessly onward, soft enough to pull your eyelids heavier. By the time you crest the far side of that siphon valley, the horizon feels hazy, like you're walking inside a watercolor. Yet the project doesn't pause just because your feet ache. Now, the aqueduct needs stability, so the engineers set about building culverts, trenches, and hidden conduits that stitch the system together beneath the soil. If arches were showpieces and siphons were daring tricks, these underground stretches were the quiet bones of the whole enterprise. You shuffle along a shallow trench where laborers dig in rhythm. The earth gives off a rich smell, damp and heavy, clinging to their tunics. A foreman paces with a wax tablet, scratching figures with his stylus, while workers haul baskets of dirt on their shoulders. The culverts don't look glamorous. They're little more than ditches lined with mortar or stone slabs. Still, they keep the channel safe from weather, invaders, and the casual donkey that might otherwise wander in for a splash. The mainstream fact here, culverts were vital in protecting water flow from contamination. Rome prided itself on delivering cleaner water than many villages enjoy today. Historians marvel that their water systems, even hidden underground, had maintenance corridors and inspection shafts spaced out for crews to climb down and clean. You picture yourself descending into one, dark, musty, but echoing with a faint trickle of water sliding past. It's not glamorous, but it's dependable. Quirky tidbit in some rural zones. Farmers illegally tapped into these underground channels with clay spouts, diverting aqueduct water to their fields. Officially forbidden, of course. Unofficially? Well, you know how rules and irrigation tend to clash when crops are dying? Imagine sneaking down with a pickaxe at night, tapping Rome's great artery like a thief at a soda fountain. Historians still argue whether these culverts were over-engineered for ordinary countryside, or whether they were a practical necessity against erosion. Was Rome just showing off with stone vaults where simple ditches might have sufficed? Scholars bicker, but as you watch the men laying slabs across the trench, you think, better safe than sorry when 500,000 Romans expect bathwater? Your eyes catch a pair of oxen dragging a sled loaded with stone lids. The lids get dropped one by one with a dull thud, sealing the trench. Each cover is heavy enough that 2 men grunt to nudge it into place. By tomorrow, soil will bury it all, and the aqueduct's skeleton will vanish from view, hidden but essential. Further on, you see an access shaft already complete, a square opening with a rope dangling inside. Children peer curiously down as if expecting treasure. You lean over, feel the cool breath of underground air, and hear the echo of distant dripping. It's oddly soothing, like nature's lullaby. The shaft is capped with a fitted stone when not in use, making the whole thing look like a forgotten well. And speaking of wells, you pass one older villager muttering that Romans ruined the old ways, replacing his ancestral spring with this foreign water. He spits in protest, which makes you chuckle because, spoiler, he'll still use the aqueduct once it's flowing. Clean, reliable water is persuasive. The work rhythm here is slower than the frantic siphon teams. Culvert builders seem to settle into a steady pace. Dig, line, seal, cover. You plod along beside them, lulled by the cycle, dirt turning into ditch, ditch into channel, channel into buried stream. Overhead, dusk slides into night and torches burn steady along the trench. Firelight glints on pickaxes and on the foreman's wax tablet as he tallies another section complete. The glow flickers across tired faces, but the work doesn't stop. Romans had a word for this persistence, perseverantia. You, though, might call it the worst overtime shift in history. Still, there's peace in this underground stretch. No soaring arches to crane your neck at, no suffocating tunnels to stumble through. Just the soft scrape of shovels, the thud of earth being replaced, and the muted promise of water flowing silently below your feet for centuries to come. As you drift further, you realize how much of Rome's achievement was hidden, quiet, invisible, like these culverts. No grand statues mark them, no poets sing their praises, yet they carried the lifeblood of empire just as surely as the marble showpieces. In that thought, your mind softens, eyelids droop, and the steady hush of buried channels begins to feel like a lullaby whispered by the soil itself. By now, your sandals are fraying at the edges, the dust crusted so thick it feels like you're carrying an extra layer of earth with each step. You sigh, but the work presses on because water doesn't just flow through arches, siphons, or culverts, it also needs bridges. Not the soaring arcade kind, but sturdy crossings where the channel must leap rivers or ravines. And tonight you find yourself trudging along a ridge as Roman engineers plan one of these functional aqueduct bridges. The scene unfolds like a strange blend of construction site and stage play. At the edge of a gully, teams measure with their groma, squinting along weighted plumb lines, adjusting string grids like fussy artists. Stonecutters are already at work nearby, chiseling blocks that will soon form a bridge pier rising out of the river. You watch men roll logs down a slope, sending a clatter so loud even the crows take flight. Those logs will become temporary scaffolding, lashed together with rope, creating a skeleton strong enough for stone to perch upon. Mainstream fact: some aqueduct bridges, like the famous Pont du Gard in modern-day France, still stand after nearly 2,000 years, a testament to Roman engineering precision. These weren't flimsy affairs, they were overbuilt, redundant, designed to outlast empires. The Romans knew the secret. If you control the water, you control the people. Quirky tidbit: Roman bridge builders sometimes placed small carved faces or inscriptions on blocks hidden inside the structure like ancient Easter eggs. Was it superstition? Was it pride? Was it just some bored mason doodling on the job? Nobody knows for sure, but it's funny to think of graffiti preserved forever under tons of mortar, whispering Marcus was here in Latin. Historians still argue whether every aqueduct bridge was strictly necessary or if some were built simply because Roman engineers loved monumental gestures. Couldn't they have rerouted, zigzagged a little, avoided this ravine? Some scholars suggest yes. Others argue the Romans wanted visibility, the message that empire could literally stride over valleys. You lean over the half-built pier and watch workers hauling baskets of rubble to dump between wooden frames. The river swirls below, annoyed at being bossed around. A man shouts, slips, nearly tumbles, and you flinch, but his comrade yanks him back with a laugh. Safety harnesses, you notice, are not a thing. Neither are HR departments. The air is sharp with wet stone dust and the resinous tang of freshly cut pine. Hammers beat rhythmically against chisels, a metallic choir ringing across the gorge. You follow a group climbing a scaffold, each man balancing a block that looks like it should require 3 donkeys instead of 1 human spine. Somehow, they manage inching upward until the bridge spine takes shape a row of arches catching moonlight, skeletal but elegant. Night deepens and torches flare along the scaffolding, their reflections dancing in the river below. You realize the scene has a hypnotic quality, glowing lights, shadowy figures, endless stone ascending into darkness. It's equal parts construction site and medieval rave, minus the music, though someone hums a tune that drifts like smoke. Pausing to wipe sweat from your brow, you hear an engineer explaining to a younger apprentice why arches are chosen instead of flat spans. "The curve carries the weight, boy," he says, tapping the air with his stylus. "It is stone teaching us its own language." The boy nods, probably thinking only about how much he hates geometry. You chuckle, remembering how math never felt so vital until someone put your drinking water on the line. Bridge construction takes patience. Unlike the trenches or culverts, here progress is slow, block by block, arch by arch. You pass one arch already completed, its keystone wedged perfectly, the whole shape self-supporting. Someone ties a garland of flowers above it, a little ceremony to honor completion. The blossoms wilt quickly, but the arch? That will stand for centuries. Walking across a finished section, you look down into the gorge. The drop is dizzying, wind curling up to slap your face. You grip the edge instinctively. Down below, the river hisses like a snake out of reach. Up here, you feel like you're walking on the backbone of Rome itself, stone vertebrae stacked in defiance of nature. And the bridge keeps extending further than your eyes can follow, like an endless sentence Rome refuses to end. You sigh, but in that sigh is a strange calm. The rhythm of stone against stone, the murmur of the river beneath, the soft orange halos of firelight together. They wrap you in a spell, as if the bridge itself is rocking you gently across sleep's threshold. Your legs ache, but the aqueduct refuses to end. Tonight's march carries you past the bridge and onward to a different. Marvel, those mysterious inverted siphons that puzzle even modern engineers. Unlike the soaring arcs of stone, these systems tuck themselves low into valleys, defying your sleepy brain's expectations of water always flowing downward and staying there. Yet somehow, the Romans coaxed it up again, as if whispering to gravity, don't tell anyone." You stand on a hilltop, peering into a valley below. Instead of arches stretching across, you see rows of fat lead pipes, bundled like snakes, plunging down one slope, slinking across the valley floor and crawling back up the other side to reconnect with the aqueduct channel. It looks wrong, like a marble run built by someone with too much wine, and yet it works. Water dives, pressure builds, and the sheer force shoves it back uphill. Nature bullied into obedience. Mainstream fact: inverted siphons were used in places where building a massive bridge wasn't practical, such as in Lyon, France. They could handle incredible pressure, but the Romans had to use strong materials, usually lead, terracotta, or even carved stone pipe sections, because wood or weaker clay would burst under the strain. Quirky tidbit: Roman plumbers often sealed joints with a mix of crushed pottery, lime, and even animal fat. Imagine a cow contributing unwillingly to your plumbing. It's the ancient version of duct tape, messy, smelly, but it held everything together. Some of these seals lasted centuries, proof that the cow gave its life for a noble cause, flushing toilets in Gaul. Historians still argue whether the Romans fully understood the math behind siphons, or if they simply relied on practical trial and error. Did they really grasp the principles of atmospheric pressure? Or did they just know from sheer stubborn testing that if you hammered enough lead pipes together, the water would eventually play along? Either way, the result is impressive, even if a bit terrifying when you imagine standing next to one bursting. You trail along the path where slaves wrestle these heavy pipes into trenches. Each section weighs as much as your entire body, and moving them downhill is more of a controlled fall than careful work. Men grunt, curse in Latin, and sometimes just let the pipe tumble, praying it doesn't smash into bits. When it finally lands, they rush to smear joints with sealant, hammering clamps into place. The air here is heavy with the metallic tongue of lead. You can almost taste it, and that's not good news. In fact, you wonder if all this pipe laying gave the Romans more than their fair share of headaches, literally. Some modern scholars suspect widespread lead poisoning, though others dismiss it as overblown. Still, you glance at the men smearing sticky sealant with bare hands, and you can't help but think they'll be glowing in the dark before long. Night settles and torches illuminate the trenches. You watch the test, water released into the first pipe. It sloshes downward with glee, vanishes into the dark, and moments later miraculously gurgles upward at the far slope, spilling into the channel again. The workers cheer, clapping each other on the back. One man throws his arms up like a gladiator victorious in the arena. Another just collapses in the mud, too tired to celebrate. You lean closer, fascinated. The system makes no intuitive sense. Water going down then up feels like a magician's trick, sleight of hand with hydraulics. But there it is, glimmering under torchlight, an obedient stream now flowing smoothly onward as if it never detoured. You realize the Romans didn't just conquer nature, they learned to cheat at its rules. Further along, you spot stacks of replacement pipes lying in neat rows, their circular mouths staring back like hollow eyes. A few boys sit inside them to escape the cold, giggling as if inside giant clay drums. For them, this is play. For the laborers, it's a back-breaking puzzle. You're caught somewhere between amusement and pity, your own body sore just from watching. The valley grows quiet as work ends for the night. All you hear is the steady drip-drip of water through the newly sealed joints, the hiss of torches extinguished, and the whisper of the wind brushing across the slope. The inverted siphon rests, ready to serve, another artery in Rome's sprawling stone body. And you, standing there half-dazed, wonder at the contradiction. An empire so advanced it built pressure systems rivaling modern pipelines, yet so careless it let workers smear animal fat and lead with their bare hands. Genius and recklessness holding hands under the stars. You shake your head, smile faintly at the absurdity, and keep walking your very long walk, refusing to pause, because the aqueduct, as always, flows forward. Your sandals crunch along gravel as dawn spreads pale light over the hills. Ahead rises one of the aqueduct's most spectacular features, the Grand Arcade, a sweeping viaduct that marches across the valley like a row of frozen giants. You stop, staring upward until your neck aches. Each arch stacks upon the next, tier after tier, stone blocks balanced with such precision that you half expect them to topple. But they don't. They've stood here for centuries, and they'll probably keep standing long after your weary feet give up. You climb the slope toward the base, and the sheer size makes you feel like an ant at the foot of a colossus. Workers scurry across scaffolding, voices echoing as they haul blocks into place. Ropes creak, pulleys groan, and the morning air fills with dust. A foreman yells, his words lost in the cavernous space beneath the arches, as if even sound has trouble finding its way across. Mainstream fact, some of these arcades reached astonishing heights. The Pont du Gard in southern France, for instance, rises nearly 50 meters taller than a 15-story building. And it wasn't just height? The Romans aligned these bridges so precisely that the slope of the water channel at the very top descended, barely a centimeter per 100 meters. Think about that. One wrong angle and the aqueduct would have turned into a very expensive birdbath. Quirky tidbit, certain aqueduct arches doubled as impromptu billboards. Graffiti carved by workers or later passers-by has been found scratched into the stone names. Crude sketches, even notes about the weather. Imagine hiking through the French countryside, stumbling on one of the greatest feats of ancient engineering, and the first thing you see is, Marcus was here. Human nature never changes. Historians still argue whether construction relied more on skilled Roman engineers or the sheer endurance of conscripted locals. Were these marvels top-down projects run like military campaigns, or were they messy collaborations, part imperial order and part local improvisation? The evidence suggests both grand planning coupled with plenty of duct tape-style fixes along the way. You walk beneath one arch, craning upward. Sunlight filters through, golden beams slicing across dust clouds. Each stone is enormous, chiseled smooth, and wedged tight with almost no mortar. You can't help but marvel at the logistics. How many oxen dragged these blocks from quarries? How many men strained on ropes, balancing them into place? Somewhere, an ancient accountant had to keep track of all this. You hope he was paid well, though knowing Roman bureaucracy, he probably wasn't. Climbing upward, you find a scaffolding platform swaying in the breeze. Workers shuffle past with baskets of mortar, shoulders bent under weight. You grip the wooden planks carefully, feeling every wobble. Your stomach lurches as you peer over the edge. From this height, the valley floor is a patchwork quilt of fields, tiny figures moving like insects far below. It dawns on you that one misstep here isn't just a stumble, it's a one-way ticket to the afterlife. The workers treat the danger with surprising nonchalance. One whistles as he balances a block on the edge, toes dangling into nothingness. Another cracks a joke, and the whole crew laughs so hard that the scaffolding trembles. Apparently, gallows humor has always been part of construction sites. A horn sounds and buckets of water are hauled up by rope. Not for drinking, though thirsty men sneak sips, but for mixing mortar. You dip a hand into one bucket, the coolness shocking against your dusty skin. It's gritty, the water flecked with lime. A worker shrugs, muttering that even their drinking water tastes like rocks these days. You smile, realizing that centuries later, we still complain about tap water. By midday, the sun blazes overhead. The stones radiate heat, and the air feels heavy, as though you're walking inside an oven. Sweat runs down your back, soaking your tunic. You pause under an arch's shade, listening to the soft echo of dripping water from the curing mortar. For a brief moment, the arcade feels alive, breathing, every arch like a rib, the entire structure of the chest of Rome inhaling and exhaling across the centuries. Beyond the arches, the Aqueduct channel continues its imperceptible slope, carrying water as if nothing extraordinary has happened. That's the real genius. You'd expect the water to be impressed, to at least pause and clap, but it just flows on, indifferent to the grandeur below. Water doesn't care about spectacle. It only cares about gravity. The day ends with torches flickering along scaffolds, small stars against the towering wall of stone. Workers descend on rope ladders, their shoulders slumped, voices hoarse from shouting over the noise. A few men linger at the base, carving initials into fresh mortar before it hardens. You can't decide if it's vandalism or legacy, perhaps both. And as you finally trudge away, your body aching from climbing and your eyes dazzled from staring upward too long, you realize something important. These arches weren't just practical, they were statements. Rome didn't only want water to flow, it wanted the world to look up in awe and whisper, "How is this even possible?" The arches whisper back, "Possible, because thousands of hands made it so." You drift onward along the aqueduct's crown, and the world below begins to blur into patches of green fields, scattered villas, and dusty roads curling toward distant horizons. Up here, the view stretches endlessly, as if the land itself bows in recognition of Rome's handiwork. The water channel beside you burbles softly, shielded by stone walls, just high enough to keep the current safe, but low enough that you can trail your fingers in the cool flow. For a moment, it feels less like infrastructure and more like an elevated river in the sky. The maintenance crews pass you, carrying tools, chisels, brushes, even simple rags. One man balances on the narrow ledge, scraping out weeds that dare to sprout between the stones. Another pries away at calcified deposits lining the channel. Mainstream fact: calcium buildup, known as sinter, was a chronic issue. Left unchecked, it could clog channels, slow the flow, and eventually force whole stretches of aqueduct offline. Romans had to assign full-time workers, known as aquarii, to patrol the lines and keep the water clear. Quirky tidbit: sometimes those mineral deposits formed stalactites that dangled like teeth from the aqueduct roof. Travelers below would gawk at them, half impressed, half annoyed, because broken bits occasionally rained down like deadly popsicles. Imagine explaining that injury at the dinner table. "No, I wasn't in a fight. A piece of plumbing fell from the sky." Historians still argue whether the Romans had systematic inspection schedules or if they mostly fixed things when disaster struck. Some inscriptions suggest organized teams with strict routes. Others hint at a more chaotic, "Oh no, the baths are dry. Better send someone up there," style of crisis management. The truth may be a mixed official duty blurred with occasional panic. You keep walking, sandals slapping against the damp stone, the water splashing faintly at your side. Ahead, two men crouch over a crack in the channel. They've patched it with clay and lead, hammering it tight, while another man mutters about the constant leaks. You lean in closer, noticing how the leak gleams dully in the sunlight. It's a reminder that Rome's brilliance sometimes came with a hidden cost, yes. The aqueducts carried life-giving water, but the use of lead pipes downstream may have carried invisible dangers. Modern scholars argue about how much that contributed to Roman health problems, but you can't help smirking at the irony. Empire sustaining water with a side of subtle poisoning. You pause, lowering yourself to sit on the aqueduct's edge. Your legs dangle high above the countryside and the wind brushes your hair. Below, a shepherd waves at you, his sheep scattering like spilled beans across the meadow. You wave back, grinning at how ordinary life continues under extraordinary construction. Rome might pour its treasury into this grand artery of stone, but to the shepherd, it's just a new backdrop to grazing sheep. The day grows hot and maintenance slows. Workers gather beneath a makeshift awning, gnawing bread and sipping watered wine. You join them briefly, chewing slowly, letting your jaw rest. Someone cracks a joke about aqueduct wine, tasting suspiciously like the stuff flowing past your toes. Everyone laughs, a weary, dusty chorus that makes the sun feel less cruel. You realize humor is as essential to maintenance as chisels and lead patches. Without it, the endless grind would break even the strongest back. As afternoon shadows lengthen, you resume the walk. The aqueduct snakes across hill and hollow, the channel stretching on and on like a stone horizon. You marvel at the sheer commitment, hundreds of kilometers of maintenance, day after day, year after year. It wasn't glamorous, no cheering crowds, no emperor statue. Just men in tunics, bent over cracks, arguing about whose turn it was to scrape out weeds. Yet, without them, the baths would run dry, fountains would sputter, and the illusion of Rome's eternal abundance would crumble overnight. Far ahead, you spot a diversion channel splitting from the main flow. It descends into a smaller branch, carrying water towards some nearby settlement. You crouch, watching the water swirl into two paths like a forked tongue. The Romans mastered not only grand designs, but also tiny, clever detail sluices, gates, overflow channels, all the little valves that let them control a liquid empire. It makes you chuckle. They may not have had smartphones, but they definitely knew how to install apps for water management. The evening arrives with a sudden chill. A worker lights a lamp, setting it on the aqueduct's edge. The flame flickers, mirrored faintly in the flowing water. For a heartbeat, it feels like you're walking alongside a glowing ribbon in the sky, a dreamlike river lit from within. The sound of trickling water merges with the steady hum of insects in the fields, and the whole world seems to exhale. You lie back on the stone, hands behind your head. Stars prick through the fading blue. The arches you passed earlier are now shadows in the twilight, solemn guardians of the flow. You realize the aqueduct isn't just stone and mortar, it's rhythm. Water falling, men climbing, cracks forming, laughter echoing, torches burning. A cycle as steady as the heartbeat of the empire. And here you are, caught in that rhythm, feet sore, head heavy, eyelids drifting. The aqueduct stretches onward, both road and river, pulling you gently toward Rome itself. The aqueduct finally begins to descend toward the city proper, its endless march of arches, giving way to denser clusters of homes, villas, and public spaces. The hum of rural quietness is replaced by a low roar, carts creaking, donkeys braying, smiths hammering, and vendors shouting. From this high perch, you see the metropolis spread like a stone labyrinth. Its streets arranged in neat lines, its temples glinting in the sun, and its bathhouses exhaling steam like gentle dragons. Rome, the thirsty giant, waits with open arms. The water you followed for miles now threads itself into distribution tanks massive, square cisterns where the flow is slowed, separated, and guided into branching pipes. These tanks, known as castella, act like switchboards, diverting water to fountains, baths, households, and even private gardens of the elite. Mainstream fact: every aqueduct entering Rome had multiple castella, each carefully calibrated so that water reached its destination with enough pressure. Quirky tidbit: some wealthy Romans bribed workers to secretly add illegal pipe taps to their villas, stealing more than their allotted share. Archaeologists have uncovered inscriptions from officials scolding these water thieves. Imagine getting caught pirating water the way people today pirate movies. It feels both absurd and very, very Roman. Historians still argue whether Rome truly provided free water for all citizens or if distribution was skewed toward the elite. Public fountains certainly existed in abundance, but evidence suggests that private households connected directly to the aqueducts often belonged to the wealthy. Ordinary families fetched water with buckets, while patricians let it gush into ornamental basins framed by marble statues. The debate lingers. Was the aqueduct a gift for the people, or mostly a perk for the privileged? You step down from the aqueduct onto a bustling street. The city swallows you immediately. Everywhere you look, water defines life. A fountain splashes in a public square, women filling clay jars as children splash their hands in the cool spray. Around the corner, a baker scrubs his counter with fresh water carried in by pipe. A grand bathhouse looms nearby, columns rising like a forest of stone, the entrance alive with chatter. You wander in, letting yourself drift with the crowd. Inside, the air is thick with steam. Pools shimmer in lamplight and tiled mosaics sparkle underfoot. Men recline in heated chambers, debating politics and poetry, while attendants stoke fires below to heat the caldarium. You notice how central water is not just for bathing, but for conversation, business deals, and gossip. The aqueduct you trudged alongside for so long has now become the backdrop for urban social life. It's strange, all that back-breaking labor in remote hills funnels into this moment, where senators soak lazily and children squeal with delight. You wander deeper, past pools of varying temperatures, and catch sight of a servant pouring perfumed oils into the water. Someone jokes that the aqueduct should come flavored like wine. The room erupts in laughter, though you silently thank the gods that no one ever tried to make Merlot Aqueduct edition. Imagine pigeons drunk on bathwater. As night falls, the city doesn't quiet, it glows. Torches flicker on street corners, their light reflecting in countless fountains. The aqueduct-fed jets keep running, trickling endlessly as if Rome itself were enchanted. You follow one stream into a smaller square, where a simple trough is filled. Donkeys drink, workers wash grime from their hands, and a lone musician plucks at a lyre nearby, his notes mingling with the splashes. You sit on the fountain's edge, letting fatigue seep into your bones. Your feet ache from the journey, your eyes heavy from the flickering firelight. The water sings softly at your side, steady, eternal. It is at once practical and poetic stone and engineering, giving birth to a sound that soothes like lullaby. Looking back, you realize the aqueduct wasn't just about water. It was about control, spectacle, power, and illusion. Rome kept itself alive by taming rivers, bridging valleys, and commanding mountains to yield. But in the end, what the city gained was something humbler and more universal, the sound of water trickling in the dark, a sound no empire could ever live without. The aqueduct has carried you here to the heart of the city, and though your walk is over, the water continues, rushing past your fingertips, disappearing into Rome's veins. You lean against the cool stone, close your eyes, and let the rhythm of the flow merge with your own slowing breath. And now, as you settle into this final stretch of the story, let the water lull you into rest. The aqueduct fades into the background now, its arches blurring into the quiet fabric of your mind. The sound of water trickling softens, thinning into a whisper, until it feels less like an engineering marvel and more like a gentle stream winding through a dream. You've walked so far, step by step, through hills and valleys, past laborers and stonemasons into the city's heart. The journey is long behind you now, and only stillness remains. Take a slow breath, as though you're standing beside one of those fountains in Rome. Imagine dipping your hand into the cool water, the surface rippling softly, the city sounds melting into nothing but a distant hum. Let your body sink deeper into rest, heavy and safe, as if the stone arches themselves are holding you steady. Each sound around you, maybe the rustle of sheets or the faint buzz of a fan, becomes part of that ancient rhythm, a rhythm of water flowing endlessly, without hurry, without end. You are no longer walking, no longer watching workers hammer and scrape, no longer wandering crowded streets. You are simply here, resting in the calm certainty that the world flows on. Even the debates and uncertainties of history, the arguments over lead pipes, or stolen water or imperial grandeur fade into soft background murmurs. They no longer matter. All that remains is the steady, soothing flow. So let your breath match the aqueduct song, in and out, a steady stream carrying you towards sleep. You are safe. You are carried. And now, at last, you can let go. End of script. Sweet dreams.